How rich the wave in front impressed with evening twilight's summer hues, while, facing thus the crimson west, the boat her silent path pursues. Welcome to Sunday Morning Poetry on the Troubadour podcast. Today we are going to go over the poem by William Wordsworth, Lines, written near Richmond upon the Thames at evening. Now, this is one of the many poems in here that just has the title, the main title of Lines. Lines left upon a yew tree. Lines delivered to me by a young boy. He has several of these poems in here. And they're all in a very similar type of meter and rhyme scheme. But the important thing is the implication of just kind of coming up with these lines, right? It's just a man speaking to men, as he put it in the preface, which is what poetry is. It's just a man speaking to men. And there's something about the simplicity of just, these are just lines. And yet within those lines is a power to penetrate your very soul, which is what poetry does. And this is an example of high romanticism. Romanticism at the beginning, at its best. And what makes romanticism? So as I've mentioned in the podcast in the past, there's a kind of a switch from what we today would call from classicism to romanticism. But what are they switching from, and why are they reacting this way? And one of the reasons why the early romantics and the 19th century romantics are reacting against is one way to think about it is a mechanization of all of nature, a soullessness. There was a sense, for instance, in John Locke's philosophy that he would purport, which is very influential in England, of course. And John Locke's philosophy of epistemology of what's called the tabula rasa idea, which I think is true, by the way. I think we are born a blank slate. But what is not true, and what the romantics were, one thing the romantics were rebelling against, is the idea that simply reality imprints onto that in a passive way. So your mind is passively just being imprinted on by reality. And Coleridge, for instance, said, no. It is a very active process. It's creativity that does this. You have to use your imagination. You have to think. He didn't put it exactly in that term, but that's essentially what he would say. And Wordsworth, of course, wrote this book with Coleridge. They were very impactful for each other, and they disagreed a little bit, but they agreed on a lot of fundamentals. And this would be one of them. And so what ended up happening was, the question is, when you're going the opposite way, where you're saying there's a soul in everything, which is what they're saying, what I think occurs is when you're an artist, particularly if you say there's a soul in the river, right? So this poem is called Lines Written Near Richmond, a city in London, or near London, upon the Thames at evening. So it's going to be a poem about this river, but it's really a poem about the internal feelings, emotions, and spirit of Wordsworth himself as a poet and his role as a poet. And this is where the Romantics revolution, this is why it's a romantic revolution, is because they go inward. They go into their own selves. They're selfish. It's about the ego. It's about what's in them and portraying that to you. Now, why should you care? Well, one thing is that it's very hard for us as humans to get into the soul of another human, except through literature, except through poetry, except in painting. So that's one of the things we need art for, is to get out of our own skin, to abscond from our spirit. Imagine an actual ethereal, Casper-like ghost coming out of your skin and going into Wordsworth for just 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. That's all you get, if that. So you better look around. You better pay attention. You better make sense of what's going on. And that's what's happening in this poem and in many of his poems, and most, or if not all of his poems. and I think in all of romantic art on some level, is you're able to enter into their world if you have an active mind. So you can't just read it. And I hope that this podcast kind of conveys that you can't just read it once and kind of get it. You got to really take out the dictionary, write out lots of sentences of your own, trying to figure it out. What does this mean? What does he mean by this? How does this structure mean something? What is this imagery going into? Who's the poet? Or who's the speaker? Who's actually talking in the poem? Who's he talking to? What's he talking about? Now, in this particular poem, we're going to have some allusion. An allusion, of course, is when when a literature person refers to other literature or other, usually literature. And in this case, there's going to be a kind of a line of poets. And there's a theme that we're going to see running throughout this about your place in history, about your place in the world, about Wordsworth's place in the world as a poet and what he's doing. And so in this, we get a beautiful description, just a plain description of the river, which is, in and of itself, useful and beneficial and wonderful. If you have these kinds of things, it adds immense value to your experience. Now, I've never been to the River Thames, but when I go to London, I'll go there eventually. I'm going to go to this spot and I'll read this poem, and it will add immense value to the poem, to experience it, to try to experience what it was like for William Wordsworth himself to sit there, and that you're a part of that tradition, right? And there's something grand about that too, in and of itself, just to be a part of something like that, just to experience what he was trying to convey in the way that he was trying to convey it, and appreciating the changes that have occurred since then, of course, too. So let's go ahead and, before I go into too much more detail about the poem itself, let's read the poem. And then if we have time, there's another poem that it alludes to that I might read, or I might at least read some passage for it, depending on the time. This is not a long poem, but I do think there's a lot going on and there's a lot to talk about. And, we'll try to keep it as short as possible, but I hope you enjoy this reading. And, you kind of just try to just enjoy the richness of the language and what he's saying, and the descriptive ways he's saying it, and how the descriptive ways he's talking about this river and a little boat that's on the river that he sees is imbued. It's kind of emanates with his own soul from the very first word. There's a kind of a sense where there's a combination of the two, that the spirit in the river is his own soul. And so let's go through this, and then we'll explore the poem afterwards. Lines written near Richmond upon the Thames at evening by William Wordsworth. How rich the wave in front, impressed with evening twilight's summer hues, while, facing thus the crimson west, the boat her silent path pursues. And see how dark the backward stream, and still, perhaps with faithless gleam, some other loiterer beguiling. Such views the youthful bard allure, but, heedless of the following gloom, he deems their colors shall endure till peace go with him to the tomb. And let him nurse his fond deceit. And what if he much die in sorrow? Who would not cherish dreams so sweet, though grief and pain may come tomorrow? Glide gently, thus forever glide, O Thames, that other bards may see, as lovely visions by thy side, as now, fair river, come to me. O glide, fair stream, forever so, thy quiet soul on all bestowing, till all our minds forever flow, as thy deep waters now are flowing. Vain thought, yet be as now thou art, that in thy waters may be seen the image of a poet's heart. How solemn, how serene, such heart did once the poet bless, who, pouring here a later ditty, could find no refuge from distress, but in the milder grief of pity. Remembrance, as we glide along, for him suspend the dashing oar, and pray that never child of song may know his freezing sorrows more. How calm, how still, the only sound, the dripping of the oar is suspended. The evening darkness gathers round, by virtue's holiest powers attended. Now there's that's the end of the poem, and there is a little asterisk that is in the actual 1798 version, and it says, the asterisk refers to when in the poem he says, such heart did once the poet bless, who pouring asterisk later did he could find. So who is he referring to in that? Who's the poet blessed? The poet blessed is Collins, who wrote, who's an English poet who wrote Ode on the Death of Thomson. Now Thomson wrote a very beautiful, I believe in 1730, long poem called Seasons, which are, of course, a poem to the season. And he was buried not far from where Wordsworth wrote this, lines written in Thames, where he wrote that. And so there's a sense where there's a connection between all of these individuals. So, and the whole, if you're not read or watching this on Facebook or YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, the full asterisk that this is written by Wordsworth himself says the following quote: Collins' Ode on the Death of Mr. Thomson, the last written, I believe, of the poems which were published during his lifetime. This ode is alluded to in the next stanza. So he's, helping you along in the poem to tell you, in case you're not aware of the allusion to Thomson and Collins and Thomson, that he's like saying, oh, well, there's an allusion here. Hey, because he doesn't expect everyone to have read everything that he's read and know everything he knows. He's specially trained in this. Now, I think he definitely avoids this kind of thing as much as possible because he wants, and this is a big value in the Romantic era, he wants his poetry, his artwork to be self-contained. And he not to say you can't have allusions in a self-contained world, but that he doesn't want to have these kind of asides too much, at least not in this poem, or in his poetry generally. Now, let's go through the poem stanza by stanza. And I did notice, if you're watching, there was like one or two little typos. And I actually got this off of a website. So I'm going to blame them, but I won't say who they were, not to get them in trouble or anything, because it's actually a university. So, hey, what are you guys doing? But maybe it's my fault. I'll check it out. But if you go to troubadourmag.com, you'll see an actual, I'll make sure to fix the errors of this grand university. I'm just messing with them. I like them. They've been helpful to me a lot, actually, in lyrical ballads. Okay, so let's go through this sucker. This is a fun thing. Let me quickly actually pull this up. No, that's not what I want. That's not what I want either. Okay, here we go. So this is actually if you're watching or on Facebook or YouTube, or if you're at troubadourmag.com, you'll see a painting of the River Thames, which is supposedly what Wordsworth might have seen, at some semblance of what he might have seen. And you can see the little boat that's out here, although it's not at evening. This is a day picture, and there's a little family here. So it's not an exact, this isn't inspired by the poem. Let's put it that way. It would be great if somebody painted something inspired by the poem. And if you know of any, I know there were many paintings, especially by Wordsworth's friend, Sir George Beaumont, that kind of indicate that were inspired by this, but I don't know for sure if there's one based on this poem specifically. So if you know of one, please send it to me at kirkbarbera@troubadourmag.com. Okay, but anyway, this is a good representation of what the Thames is looking like at this period of time. If you look at it in 2019, it's vastly different, of course, couple hundred years will do that. Now, although there's some similarities. Now, one interesting thing to think about, I'm not 100% sure how important this is, but it's not unimportant. It's that I think even at the time, they're aware that, they have this little bend in the Thames, and there's a certain kind of current going on here. And it's very known to the people of Richmond, I'm pretty sure, that they are being infringed on like millimeter by like teeny little microscopic erosion is going on. So there is a kind of sense where the river is taking over. And I think there is that kind of feeling of the grandiosity of this thing, that it's kind of expanding little by little and eating away or taking away from the existence of Richmond. Of course, this is like we know now thousands or millions of years before it does anything noticeable, but this is still something that, might have been imbued in the story to some degree. And I'll just give you a second, if you're watching, to kind of, hopefully you look at the whole painting. It's a nice little painting, a very serene scene. So when you have the lines, here's some good lines if you're watching, especially, that I think that can be very useful here. And those are the lines, third stanza. Glide gently, thus forever glide, O Thames, that other bards may see as lovely visions by thy side. As now, fair river, come to me, O glide, fair stream, forever so thy quiet soul on all bestowing, till all our minds forever flow, as thy deep waters now are flowing. So there's a kind of, I think, beauty, I hope, just in the passage itself, even without knowing the meaning of it. Although maybe the meaning might be, kind of implied to you a little bit. It's there to some degree. But there's a power in what he's saying that we should think about. And the implication of this man, this poet, this man speaking to men, who is impacted by this River Thames in his soul, and we're getting a glimpse into his soul, which is united with the rich wave. Now let's look at this for a moment. So the opening lines are, how rich the wave in front, impressed with evening twilight's summer hues. So the one question to ask in a poem like this especially is, who wrote these lines? Right? When it's the title is Lines Written, well, who is it? Well, and you could think of it in this sense literally as Wordsworth. Like, this is Wordsworth saying, this is me writing these lines in a sense. He's the poet's speaker, and he's confronting the beauty of the Thames River. How rich the wave. And it reflects the summer dusk colors. And there on the river is a boat pursuing her path alone. While facing thus the crimson west, the boat her silent path pursues. So imagine for a moment the poet standing on the shores of the Thames and seeing that boat out in the distance, toward dusk or at evening, right at the change. I've said this before, that Wordsworth is considered the border poet. One of his his only famous play is called The Borderers. And there is something about being on the border with him, where there's, the change in the dusk, from dusk to evening. He says that these lines are written at evening, but he must have seen it like right at the cusp. And he's kind of, where's that feeling? And there's also the border between his soul and the river and how they flow together. And we're going to get that feeling of the flow of the river and the flow of his mind and how he thinks about the world. And I think there's a good analogy here. I think that, that's the whole point. So he's sitting there, he's looking at this, or he's standing there, he's looking at this boat out in the distance, and the poet is contemplating this scene. Now, a lot of times when we go and see something beautiful, we may just look at it and say, that's beautiful. But he is actually trying to help you see this thing the way that he does. Now, this is super valuable to you. This is what art does, is it trains your consciousness. Trains your consciousness. That's how you interact with the world. So he's giving you new ways to look at the rich wave, which is impressed with evening twilight summer hues. So You have the glint. This is what the painting I was showing. If you can go to troubadourmag.com, you could see the painting. That's actually showing you how to look, how to see the world, how to see that particular picture, which when you go out and look at the world, you've now expanded your abilities to see. So in this first sentence, we're getting a description of the setting of the scene, but it's embedded in emotional language. He does not say, for instance, the rich wave in front impressed with. He says how the rich wave, like how beautiful, right? And so there's an implication there with the word how, that it's coming, that it's emotionally impacting him. Like, wow, how beautiful is that sunset? Rather than saying there are oranges and there are reds. You can measure the spectrum of the colors and the heat waves that are coming. Like, that's the scientific way, which is dead in this sense. And what he's saying, he's imbuing it with his own emotions. This is why we say, when romanticism is talked about as the egoistic, it's about the individual, because it is about him. It's about how he's been impacted by the rich wave in front, impressed with evening twilights, summer hues. Now, in the second sentence, and see how dark the backward stream, and still, perhaps, with faithless gleam, some other loiterer beguiling. Now, remember, a loiterer is someone who kind of just stands around, right? An idle person, just kind of standing, not doing something, like Wordsworth is doing right now. A poet looks like an idler. If you've ever seen somebody reading a book, they're like an idler. They're just like sitting there. They're not doing anything. They're not moving. They're not active. They're not going out and building something and being manly or important in the world. They're just sitting and reading. Nothing's going on from the outward world, outside looking on them. And same thing with someone who's contemplating. If someone's just sitting there looking out into the river, they're not doing anything. And yet, Wordsworth is saying that there is a whole world going on. This is, again, what the Romantics have revolutionized, is that, excuse me, there's the outer world that we know we can measure. We know there's so much. But as Victor Hugo said, that there's one thing grander than the sea, that is the sky, and there's one thing grander than the sky, that is the interior of the soul. This is the Romantic project. This is what Romantics brought to the world, and it is critical, and it changed everything. So in the second sentence, the poet points out the darkness of the stream. See how dark the backward stream. Perhaps this is the wake left by the little boat that's there. And, watch a moment go by. It's as if the Tim and the boat are smiling. And see how dark the backward stream. So this is always the problem with Wordsworth. There's always so many different versions. So I wrote a note about the smiling, but that's in reference to the 1798 book I have of his. And there's a sentence or a line that's omitted from this one for some reason, from the one that you saw and I read to you. So the line is, after he says, and see how dark the backward stream, a little moment passed, so smiling. And still, perhaps with faithless gleam, some other loiterer beguiling. Now, I'm not sure why this was omitted, because the website that I got this from was doing historic. So it could be that this version I have is actually the 1800 version, or it's some slight alteration. But this is always the difficulty with Wordsworth. There's so many different versions of the poem. I'll put the version that I read on troubadourmag.com so you can get that. But when there's a line where he talks about, and see how dark the backward stream, a little moment passed, so smiling. And so what I was saying is, what he's telling you is, in this moment, he's getting you into his consciousness. He's idle watching this moment go by with this boat on the stream. And it's as if the Tims in the boat are smiling, in a sense. So there's almost, not as, now whether it's a happy smile or a wry smile, a rueful smile, we don't really know. It's just some kind of smiling, which we do associate with joy. Maybe that's why he cut that line at some point. But yeah, so that's what I was, I talked about a second ago with my note, and that got a little confusing. Okay, So that's what I think is going on in the first line. Is it's setting up the scene of this beautiful scene, and then it's going into his, it's imbued with his emotional inner state, that he's looking at the beauty and it's doing something to him. He's not looking at it as a passive receiver of something. He's looking at it as like, this is a beautiful thing and it's impacting my very soul. And I have a unity with the river, the boat, and myself. And I'm the loiterer that it is beguiling. And beguiling means like to deceptively charm, to charm you, to trick you, but to do it deceptively and charmingly. Okay, let's go into the second stanza. Such views the youthful bard allure, but heedless of the following gloom, he deems their colors shall endure, till peace go with him to the tomb. And let him nurse his fond deceit, and what if he must die in sorrow? See, here it says, and what if he much die in sorrow? And in my version, it says must die. I don't know if that's a typo or not. But that is a big difference. And let him nurse his fond deceit. So we'll talk about what the deceit is. And what if he much die in sorrow? So what if he's, much, that must be a typo. And must die in sorrow. Who would not cherish dreams so sweet, though grief and pain may come tomorrow? Though grief and pain may come. So they're both pretty much the same, except for that somehow that typo, which I'm going to blame on the website because I copied and pasted. He talks about himself in the third person here again, right? Such views the youthful bard allure. But it could be, we're going to find out at the totality of this when he brings in Collins and Thompson. He brings in two other poets who have written on the Thames, like he is doing today in 1798. And he's youthful at this point. And I think when he actually wrote this poem, it might have been before 1798. It might have been when he was in college. But the point, and then he, published it later in 1798, Lyrical Ballads. But the point that's going on here, I think, is, he's talking about the youthful bard, about himself, but also simultaneously in the abstract. I mean, that's the thing that's going on, is he's making connection between all of them and this Thames. The Thames has been unchanging, although it's kind of eroding. It's growing. It's moving in on Richmond's territory, Richmond, the city. And he's saying that this view allures, attracts, brings something special to the youthful bard. But here's where it goes from smiling to something darker there, which we get a lot with the Romantics. Like, there's a poem by William Blake that I love called On the Echoing Green, where it's all about playful, but then there's just a little line where it's like, and then I don't remember the line exactly off the top of my head right now, and then there is like a darkening green, right? So it goes from the echoing green and there's a darkening, right? It's just, and so you just kind of get this emotional feeling like there's this beautiful scene with kids playing and, people picnicking and lovers under trees. And then there's just a teeny tinge of darkness coming towards you, right? And so it like kind of colors the whole scene. You're like, oh man, once you get to that last line, it's like, wow. And that, I think that's kind of going on, here, is that there's a little bit of darkness starting to come into the scene. The painter is he goes into this beautiful thing, and then right in the corner, he's like, oh, there's a storm a-coming, right? Although in this poem, it's going to be a little bit more than just a little dark corner, because we're going to get something deep here. But heedless of the following gloom, he deems their colors shall endure, till peace go with him to the tomb. So he's saying that those beautiful colors that he's seeing in the rich wave of the Thames and the boat and the greenery across the whole smoothness of the Thames River right now, that picture will go with him to the grave. So when Wordsworth dies, it's going to go with him. And let him nurse his fond deceit. So even though there's something false about this scene, that it's pure beauty maybe. And what if he must die in sorrow? So he could lose his family, his friends. Like, he's going to die alone, forgotten. Nobody knows anything about him. He's going to die in sorrow. But what if that happens? Okay, what if? What about it? Who would not cherish dreams so sweet, though grief and pain may come tomorrow? So even though that black dot in the painting, in the corner of the painting, which is coming right into his world and is going to take over his whole life, and he's going to die like Thomson, like Collins, like the poets like Shakespeare and Milton and Dante and all the great poets that came before him, even though that's going to happen, and maybe he's going to even die tomorrow, and maybe it's going to be in painful death. But how could he not, in this moment, living right now, standing where he was in 1795, whenever he wrote this or stood on that Thames, and saw that beautiful scene at dusk, right on the border when it goes and happens. So that's what he's saying. It's like, I'm going to live in this moment right now. I might die tomorrow, but this, so, this is beautiful and worthwhile and worth living for. So, the cliche, live for the moment, live, and that's great. But if you've ever been like me or like many people, I think, eventually that cliche becomes meaningless. So, but it's still an important thing to remember to live in the moment. So this is a poem that's using different words in a different way to jolt you, like give you a little shock to your system to bring you out and remind you to live in the moment. But only if you do the work. That's the difference between something like this and a cliche. Is here, you got to do the work to get that meaning and to make it impact you. Okay. Now this is the next stanza, the verb glide is important here. And the verb glide means to kind of move, to be in motion without sound, right? So think about like a person, gliding over on a boat. Like it just feels like it's gliding, or a dancer glides across the dance floor, right? There's a kind of harmony and peacefulness and calm to it. They're not smashing through the dance floor, right? They're not crashing through the river. The swimmer is gliding on like he's so in sync with the river that the swimmer is gliding over through the river, right? So there's a kind of going with and quiet and calm that go with glide. And then of course he adds the adverb gently. So glide gently, thus forever glide, forever, right? So there's that eternity that we're getting with the Thames will last forever. He himself, just like Collins and Thomson, will die. They're not going to be forever, but his words will, right? His words are worth something and they are going to last forever. Glide gently, thus forever glide, O Thames, that other bards, other poets like me, may see as lovely vision by thy side, as now, fair river, come to me. And it's like, fair river, come over here, come. I'll glide, fair stream, forever so, thy quiet soul on all bestowing. Till all our minds forever flow, as thy deep waters now are flowing. Now it's interesting that in a sense that the way he's using this sentence and the way he's writing it is that he's commanding the river in a sense. He's saying glide gently, right? Like, and he's not saying he's not telling a person who's a swimmer to glide through the Thames. He's talking to the Thames. He's talking to the river. It's like, oh, Mississippi River, run across the street for me and grab some milk, right? It's like, who tells a river what to do? Well, a poet does. And he says, glide gently, forever glide, O Thames. And why should they do that? So other bards may see what I'm seeing here and be impacted and feel what I'm feeling. I want, his project is for you to feel what he is feeling. This is how he trains your mind, your consciousness, and your emotions. And then, as lovely visions by thy side as now, fair river, come to me. So the visions that are coming to me now, I want other bards to see. Oh, glide, fair stream, forever so, thy quiet soul on all bestowing, right? So there's that soul. The river has a soul, but really the soul is his soul. It's Wordsworth's soul, and they're connected. Thy quiet soul on all bestowing, till all our minds forever flow, as thy deep waters now are flowing. So he wants a kind of a unity between, just like there's a unity between nature and the river and how all these harmonious things interact. He wants that with all humans, at least on some level. So I don't think he wants everyone to think the same and be the same person necessarily. But the way he's put it in some of his writings is what he wants is for everyone, at the level of humanity to have a certain level of harmonious thought and feeling, right? And that is to try to strive to be one in understanding something with nature. So whether you're a poet or painter, or you're a mechanic or a scientist, or a long haul trucker, or a pilot, whatever it is, whatever you do, if you're a teacher, if you're a marketer, business owner, and you own a grocery store, I can keep going. The point is that all those people, it's like, hey, he's John the plumber. Before he's John the plumber, he's just John. He's just a man, right? And that's what Wordsworth is trying to do, is he's trying to speak to the man beside the profession and the father and the brother and the son. Before all that, stripping all that aside, he wants to talk to the man. And underneath all of our, the things that we put on ourselves as, the facades we put on, the masks we put when we go out in public, we're trying to be cool, we're trying to be calm. We want people to think of us in a certain way when we go out in the world. We want women, if we're meant to look at us as capable and strong and able to provide a life that they want, so that they'll go home with us and marry us. And women want men to think, that they're beautiful and feminine and wise and loyal, or whatever it is that are valuable to them. That if you strip all that aside, the essence of humanity, he wants everyone to be in a flow with that, to strive for that flow. And that's what he's getting at with this poem. And he wants that flow to be deep, right? Deep waters are flowing. And he saw, and a lot of the romantics saw, the mechanistic nature of science and the way science was viewed, as all of nature was just mechanistic. It was just a clock, right? That's the clockmaker example. Or that is, for instance, this is one of the arguments for God, is that he designed this beautiful, perfect mechanistic thing and then put it out into the world, and we have to figure it out. And he put the laws in place and so on and so forth. But, Wordsworth is saying that there's something more there, that it's not, because that, a watch is dead. It moves, it does stuff, but it's not alive. It doesn't think, it doesn't act in certain ways. And he's saying, no, nature is not like that at all. Nature is imbued with a kind of soul. It's got spirit. It's fresh. It's lively. So here's the next stanza. Vain thought, yet be as now thou art, that in thy waters may be seen the image of a poet's heart. How bright. Yeah, so in the I don't know how that could happen, but in the version I showed you, it says how bring, how solemn, how serene. That doesn't make any sense at all. So the image of a poet's heart, how bright. That makes sense. A bright soul. How solemn a soul. How serene a soul. Such heart did once the poet bless, who, pouring here a later ditty, could find no refuge from distress, but in the milder grief of pity. Now there's something very important that we talk about kind of in passing, but I haven't talked about too much, and that is the seriousness by which these artists took serious things. I think they revered what they're talking about here, what they're talking about with the relationship between the soul and the river, and the profundity of the soul, and the importance of the inner world that you have. And it's a sense that we have lost. We don't have that anymore. We don't take something so seriously that it's worth dying for in the West. Not really. I think there are some people who maybe take silly things seriously, like PC things or identity politics. Although I don't even think they take it that seriously. But I can respect that they at least pretend that they do, and they sure act like they take that seriously. I think we're seeing with Greta Thunberg and the environmentalists for a long time, we're saying, well, they've taken that seriously and they're ready to kill for it. Millions of people. They don't care. And there's just some degree I can respect that they have, that this is a value they're wrong, but this is a value that they hold, nature above man. They don't care about what happens to man. They just care about the nature. And that they're going to, do whatever it takes to get that. And it's like, at least there's something to work with there. There's a value. It's not like, I don't care about anything. Right? That's worse. And I think a lot of people are like that, where and by care, again, I want you to take the word seriously. When I say care, I mean, it's like you go on the battle lines. This is a line in the sand kind of care. This is a value that's deeply ingrained in your heart, and you will die for it because it's what living means to you. And I don't see that a lot in people. I do see it with like Greta Thunbergs and the environmentalists. I see it with some Christians, but I don't see it much in most other people. I don't see it in atheists or anybody else. And that's a problem, that there's not, this is why, if you followed me in the past, Jordan Peterson, I did a series on Jordan Peterson. I think this is why he's so impactful, because he drew a line in the sand and he was passionate about it. He says, I will not cross. I value the word too much. This is my value. I'm not going to cross it. You could fire me. You could put me on the firing line, and I will not cross this line. That's what values are. When I listen to a lot of podcasts today, I don't really know what people are valued, too much. Sometimes, like, I don't know what Joe Rogan would die for. Maybe he might die for his daughters, but I don't know if he would die, if people really came after him for his hunting. Would he, die for that, for his guns? I mean, maybe he would. I hope he would. I don't know if he would die, but, I hope he values those so much. And that's what I think is kind of happening here in this poem. And he's kind of expressing that. Now, when he says vain thought, what is the vain thought right here at the top of this stanza 4? And what he's talking about is he calls the idea that his words can make our minds flow like a river a vain thought. Like this last part, thy quiet soul on all, every single human being, bestowing, putting upon them, till all our minds forever flow as thy deep waters now are flowing. So to have that kind of depth of feeling, that the river has depth too, that's a vain thought. Yet be as now thou art, you are. Yet be as you are now, you, listener. That in the rivers there, that in those rivers may be seen the image of a poet's heart. So you, yes, you listening on the podcast right now, or on YouTube, or on Facebook, or on Twitter, or wherever you listen to this, that you, however you are, whether you're imperfect or messed up, or you're perfect and you're great and you're the best you could be, wherever you are, you're 99 about, days from death, you're 15 right at the beginning of your life, that in thy waters may be seen the image of a poet's heart. How bright, how solemn, how serene. Such heart did once the poet bless, who such heart did once the poet bless. So the poet, he's referring to Thomson, who, pouring here a later ditty, Collins, could find no refuge from distress, but in the milder grief of pity. Now, I do think the allusion is necessary to know. I think it really helps. But even if you don't, even if you just think of poets in the abstract, you can get the sense that such heart did once other poets bless. So some poet in the past blessed, right? Like you bless, like a priest maybe blesses this river or something and says, this is a river of God or whatever, right? And this is the river blessed by a poet. And then the poet poured a later ditty, right? That's a poem, right? But kind of a cute little poem. And even he could find this great blessed poet who blessed the river, could find no refuge from his own distress, but in the milder grief of pity, he felt pity. And now we get the last stanza. Now, before I read it again, I'm not going to read the whole poem by Collins, but I will include it at troubadourmag.com so you can read it. But I'll read the first stanza and then the stanza that's relevant here. So the first stanza, you'll see some echoings. You'll see what Wordsworth is referring to. So Wordsworth is echoing the poem I'm about to read, the poem called Ode on the Death of Mr. Thomson. So he's trying to get so Wordsworth is making an allusion or an analogy, a comparison between the eternality of the river, right? The rich wave that goes on, and it's eroding Richmond little by little. And the eternality of these poets. The Homer, he doesn't mention Homer and Virgil and Milton and Dante and Shakespeare and so on, the whole line of them. But, he's indicating it by saying you got Thomson in the 1700s, early 1700s. Then you got, at his death, you have Collins, who wrote the ode to Mr. Thomson. And now you have me. And now I hope there's going to be, and then, me as in Wordsworth. And I hope this poem will inspire other poets to write their poetry, right? And they're going to kind of build on each other. I said this before, but I think this is big part of what's been lost in postmodernism is that continuity. Like no one's talking to all these dead poets because they're dead white men, right? But so we've cut off thousands of years of men grand geniuses who've talked to one another in this manner just in the last 40 years. Like, the last 40 years just cut off everything we've ever learned, and put together from thousands of years. Okay, here's the first stanza. In yonder grave, a druid lies. It's like a magical person of the forest. In yonder grave, a druid lies, where slowly winds the stealing wave. The year's best sweets shall duteous rise, to deck its poet's sylvan grave. So he goes on, lots of beautiful imagery. Here's the stanza that is being echoed by Wordsworth 50 years later or so, or sometime later. Remembrance oft shall haunt the shore, when Thames in summer wreaths is dressed, and oft suspend the dashing oar, to bid his gentle spirit rest. Now here's the stanza by Wordsworth. Remembrance, as we glide along. They're gliding, right? Just like the boat is gliding on the Thames, Wordsworth is gliding on the spirit that has passed through poets before him, into him, and into the next poet, right? Just like a river. For him suspend the dashing oar, and pray that never child of song may know his freezing sorrows more. So I hope, for him, the dashing oar, so that boat that he was active once in, moving it along with his oar, now it's Wordsworth's turn, just like it was Thomson who was rowing the boat, then it was Collins, and then now it's Wordsworth, and then after Wordsworth is gone, it's going to be the next one. But for Thomson, the dashing oar is suspended. It stopped. It ceased because he's dead himself. For him, the dashing oar is suspended, and pray that never child. And so I'm going to pray that child of his songs, his poems, may know his freezing sorrows more. That they can understand him. How calm, how still, the only sound, the dripping of the oar suspended. The evening darkness gathers round, by virtue's holiest powers attended. So you can notice that there's that kind of echoing when he says, and oft suspend the dashing oar, to bid his gentle spirit rest. Right? And he's saying, Wordsworth, or Collins says about Thomson, I'm getting them mixed up, remembrance often shall haunt the shore. So it's remembrance that shall haunt the shore often, when Thames in summer wreaths is dressed, right? So when it's growing in its summer bloom, it's dressed in summer, it's summer dress, for instance, and often suspend the dashing oar, to bid his gentle spirit rest. So another way to look at that dashing oar is maybe, the person on the boat who's rowing the boat, he stops for a moment. Stop activity. Stop running if you're at the treadmill. Stop lifting weights. Stop cooking for a moment. Pull over if you're driving. Land the plane. No, don't land the plane. If you're working, just pause for a moment. If you're digging a ditch, I'm sure a lot of you are doing that. writing something, pause. Suspend the dashing oar. And pray that never child of song may know his freezing sorrows more. So hopefully no child will know his sorrows. How calm, how still, the only sound, the dripping of the oar suspended. So all you can hear is just the aftermath of pausing. Right? That's always what you get when you're quiet. You can always hear things that you didn't hear before. And another analogy that goes where, the metaphor of the suspended oar and the dripping water is that Collins and Thompson and Wordsworth and Shakespeare and many other great poets dipped their oars into the River Thames in order to get a ditty for you. And now they're dead. They're gone. They're buried in the dust. They're bowed to the dust. And yet if you pause and you look at what they left behind, the drops from the oar, there's something that is profound and meaningful in that only little drops of sound that's left over in the grandiosity, in the scope of the grandiosity of the River Thames. And that is the virtue. That is the holiest powers attended to, the muses that give power to the poets. And that is our poem for today. I hope you enjoyed this religious experience. And I'm an atheist. When people ask me what do I mean by spirit, this is what I mean. When they ask me what I mean by soul if I don't believe in God, this is what I mean. This is it. It's the spirit that's in reality, imbued by our own inner world. Now, I don't think anything supernatural of that. I believe it is a natural phenomenon of our consciousness. It's what our consciousness imbues on the world. Without us, the river is just a river. And it's not even that. It's just this thing in the world. It's the thing that animals go to drink out of and to fish out of and to hunt out of. That's it. We give it all the meaning that it has. We give it all the beauty that it has. Or we don't give it that. And we choose to simply do nothing with it or to revere it absent humanity, which I think is what environmentalists are doing. They're obscuring what they're taking, in a bad direction, what the Romantics wanted. And I think this isn't, a problem with the Romantics, but that's a discussion for another time. And I'll see you next time.